My pleasure to introduce Mr. James Sokol to talk about Mozilla and more support and architecture awesomeness. So thank you.
Thanks, Eric. So I'm James Sokol. I want to give the same caveat that some other people have. I'm not a docs writer by trade. I'm an engineer. I write documentation. I use read the docs for libraries that I maintain, but I do work on Mozilla's documentation platforms. So the two that I work on are the Mozilla Developer Network, which some of you may have used, and I work on support.mozilla.org, which is our user-facing help. You heard Michael Verdi talk about it yesterday morning. We affectionately call it Sumo because we abbreviate everything, and I will use that frequently, so wanted to get that out of the way. So a little bit of refresher or reminder about Sumo. Sumo is for hosting documentation about Firefox itself, whether it's getting started information or how-tos for various features. If you open Firefox and you go anywhere and you click on Help, you will end up on Sumo. And I want to sort of tell you a little bit of a story. This is a little bit of the history of Sumo condensed down and sort of my personal history with it. So this all sort of starts around 3.5 years ago when I started working on support. This is more or less what Sumo looked like back then, and you can't really see it because it's not that contrasty, which is one of the problems, but you know, we have this big blue bar at the top. That's what all Mozilla websites look like. We have this sort of white text on a light blue background. That's what all Mozilla websites look like. And the thing about all Mozilla websites look like this is this was a visual design. This was not a support site that had been designed. It's one of our web properties. Our web properties look like this. Make it happen. So around 3 years ago, we started replacing the Sumo platform. And about the same time, we did another visual refresh of Mozilla websites. And we ended up with something like this. So actually, the big blue bar at the top was still there. This is a mock-up, so it didn't contain it. But you know, we've dropped the weird blue background. We sort of have shrunk the header a little bit. But now we've got this big sort of space here taken up by these cute characters. Search is huge. This boilerplate text is huge. And here's sort of the real problem area. You can't see it here because, again, this is a mock-up. But this area, without the big red arrow and without the pictures, was a list of articles. There were something like, this is for Firefox Home, I think there were something like 8 articles about it, and they were all listed here. For Firefox Desktop, if you went to the desktop landing page, there were something like 30 or 40 articles listed. No visual hierarchy, they were simply unordered lists. You know, troubleshooting, here are some troubleshooting articles. Not a great discoverability scheme. So eventually we got to this, which you can't see at all. If you go to support.mozilla.org, you'll see this in much higher detail. And I want to talk a little bit about how we got to this. So some of the key features here are we have these nice, big, browsable starting points. And we still have search. It's still, you know, there, still accessible, but it's not nearly as big because a lot of our users use browsing, not searching. So how did we get here? Well, I'm going to go back in time again. And the second site that I showed you, the big nurse cat character, we knew that there were some things wrong with it. You know, we suspected that we weren't being as helpful as we could be. And we knew we had some issues. We didn't have the best metrics at the time. We didn't have a lot of great in-app business metrics. You know, we were sort of relying on web server logs, which if you've ever gone and parsed through a ton of Apache logs to figure out where people are going, it's not that fun. Our web metrics weren't that great at the time, but we did have some data. We had a helpfulness survey at the bottom of every article, which we still have. Did this article help? And the scores were not across the board that great. We had lots of people searching and then exiting. We had lots of people searching and then having to refine their search rather than actually getting to an article, and we had a high bounce rate. Now, one of the fun things about the bounce rate is you get to Sumo by hitting buttons in Firefox. For a long time, one of those buttons was the F1 key, right? F1 help. We did an exit survey on bounces, and something like 90% of the people who were coming and bouncing immediately off the Firefox desktop landing page said the reason they had come in the first place was their cat stepped on the keyboard. So what are we going to do about this? Around that time, we had a user experience expert dedicated to the web and our website's start. Firefox has a great user experience team, but we didn't have anybody dedicated to web. And we didn't have, so then we did, all of a sudden. And one of her first tasks was to look at support, because nobody with user experience expertise had looked at it in years. So the first thing that we did is called a heuristic evaluation. Anybody familiar or been through a heuristic evaluation? A few. So a heuristic evaluation is more or less asking two questions. Does this product, in this case a website, does it do what it's supposed to do, and how well does it do what it's supposed to do? The best way to do a heuristic evaluation, and it's something that if you have a large application, I really recommend at some point, is to bring in people from outside, people who don't have your tribal knowledge, people who don't have your expectations. If you play video games, one of the first things a good video game has to do is teach you how to play itself. The question is sort of, can support, in this case, teach you how to use itself if you come there for the first time? So we actually ended up, the user experience person we hired is from Portland, Crystal Beasley, if anybody knows her, she's fantastic. And we ended up contracting out to a couple of people that she knew, the heuristic evaluation. And we got quite a bit of feedback from that. And we sort of sorted it, and we said, all right, these are just low-hanging fruit. These are easy, dumb mistakes. We can fix those. Let's fix them. Some things were a little bit bigger. We sort of took on some time, fitted them into our roadmap, tried to improve things. But there was this one really big thing that was kind of sticking out. And it turned out that if people got to the right article, the helpfulness scores were a lot higher. If they didn't get to the right article, surprise, the helpfulness scores tanked. So people weren't getting to where they needed to go, either through searching or through browsing. They weren't finding the right things. So we knew we had an information architecture problem. And we wanted to, this was sort of outside anybody's working knowledge, so we wanted to bring in somebody from outside. And we ended up working with the Nielsen Norman Group. Again, they're fantastic. If you ever get the chance to work with them, take it. And this was sort of part of a much larger project, but I want to talk about a small chunk of it. We wanted to analyze the current structure of the website and the docs. We wanted to propose a new version of that, and then we wanted tests so that we could refine it. We wanted some sort of data. So, analyze. The first step to analyzing something like a corpus of hundreds and hundreds of docs is manually looking through it. And this was a big task that our contractor took on. And you look at, what articles are there, where are they linked from? And we also wanted to figure out sort of the taxonomy of what we had. And to do that, we used a technique called a card sort. Card sorts are fantastic. Has anybody done card sorts? All right, lots of people, cool. For those who don't know, a card sort is you pretty much take all of the things, I don't have that picture here, but, and you literally just sort them into buckets that make sense. In our case, we used a tool called Optimal Sort, and we sort of pre-selected the buckets. But if you want to do this, I've done this on my website, I've done this on friends' portfolio websites, I've done this on lots of little side projects. You don't need fancy tools, you don't need anything else. And one of the things that we've done on MDN more recently is a card sort where we just took Post-it notes. And we had people go up to a whiteboard and group them in a way that was logical to them. It really helps you sort of figure out How do I want to structure this? What's a logical structure for it? What are the categories that I need? And this gave us sort of a map of what the site looked like. So we knew users weren't finding the right thing, and we wanted to sort of understand why they weren't finding the right thing. And now that we had this map, we used a tool called TreeJack, which, again, I'm sure you can't see. But TreeJack is, if you've done user testing, like usertesting.com, or sort of sitting over somebody's shoulder and watching them use an application, one of the most common things is to say, here's a task, I want to watch you do it. This is very much like that, except you don't have the entire website in front of you. You don't have all of the docs. You just have the titles of the docs. And instead of waiting for the person to actually accomplish the task, you wait for them to say, this is where I would have found it. This is it. So TreeJack is another optimal workshop tool, and it's fantastic, and it lets you do these tests remotely. We plugged in our current information architecture, and I don't remember exactly, it was like 10 or 12 tasks, and the results were not great. This isn't all of the success rates. Some of them were a little bit higher, but some of them were as low as 50, 53%. That means 1 out of 2 people can successfully do this, and some got even worse. Maybe 1 out of 3 people, maybe 1 out of 10. Ooh, and a couple of them were really bad. 1% success rate. Because if somebody comes to the website and wants to do this, somebody reads the Firefox documentation and they want to solve a problem, they've got like a 1 in 100 chance. That's bad. But we finally had data, right? These are all data points. We had something we could work with and something we could optimize. And we also found a bunch of, just from this test, we were sort of able to discover a number of issues that we hadn't addressed before. So we found that some articles were missing. We hadn't written how to do this. We found that some were badly named. Either we were using names that are part of our jargon or in our vocabulary, or we had some things that were kind of blending. Michael's looking at me. Michael wrote a lot of the docs after all of this. So some of them were badly named. We had sort of gone back and forth on, do we want to name things like questions? Do we want to name them like answers? Reset my password. So there was some inconsistency, and it wasn't always clear. Some things needed to be consolidated. We had something like 7 articles about Firefox Sync, and people didn't know which one to use. So we needed to sort of bring that together. I just watched Jurassic Park 3D in theaters because I love that movie, and I love Dr. Malcolm's thing about strange attractors. But what these really are is red herrings. They're articles that look like this is the place to go, and it's not. And when people come to the wrong article because they think it's the right article and it doesn't solve their problem, they're not happy. It's not helpful. They leave. So we went and we really, one of our user experience people and a contractor, they proposed a couple of different navigational structures, a couple of different information architectures. One of them was sort of product-centric, starting with what product are you using, what are you trying to do. And this is sort of structured around education, how-tos, more features, it turns out. And the other one was more of a task-based thing. What are you trying to do? And this works more within once you've chosen a product, but it does work really well for troubleshooting. You can say, what are you trying to do? I'm trying to fix something. Okay, what are you trying to fix? One of the really interesting findings from all of this was that there's sort of a rule of thumb that you don't want more than 7 links on a page and you don't want to be more than 3 pages deep. We did not find that to be true at all. We actually found that if you have a deeper navigation structure, but it's very clear at each step, people will click through pretty far. Much like the funnels getting 20% of people through a 9-page tutorial, as long as every one of those pages makes sense and you know what you're getting into. So the results, we took this and we took these 2 things. We ran them through TreeJack again. And, wow, I'm going to come in way early. Okay. We ran them through TreeJack again, and then we sort of refined it and we combined them into Well, we called it the combined information architecture. But then we ran that through the test again, and the results were pretty great. We went from 1 out of 2 people on this task to 9 out of 10. Here, I think we went up to 70%. This one was, I can't read this from here. We got to 70% again. 8 went to 90%. And I think the one that we were all happiest about was we got a 1% task all the way up to 86%. We did 3 or 4 iterations of TreeJack tests. You can do lots. The nice thing about something like TreeJack is that you don't have to rearrange your entire documentation. You can just take titles and say, well, what if I sorted them this way? You can do lots of iterations. You have data now. You can see, where are people clicking first? Where are people ending up? Are they in the right spot? Have you eliminated all of the excess bad documents? So we took that, and yeah, really early. We took that, and we built wireframes out, and there were new visual designs again. So sort of ended up with this really, really large structural overhaul. We spent a long time reworking the content, fixing things like keywords, fixing things like tags. Our tag taxonomy got much smaller and much more well-defined. We have a part of each document where you can just specify words that are relevant, that are not in the body of the document, and that never show up anywhere in the user interface. We spent a long time filling that out, saying, what do people use to describe this? What words do people use? One example is we say bookmarks, because that's what they're called in Firefox. They're called bookmarks. A lot of our users call them favorites, especially the users that we are sort of trying to retain, the ones that just moved from IE, right? So we worked a lot on bringing our content to where people were. And then we spent a pretty significant amount of time implementing the new IA, as we were calling it, in the code and structuring our landing pages differently. And we ended up with a pretty significant result. And I know that I've talked about data, and data is a really big part of this, and we like to optimize these things, and we like the graphs to go the right way, right? Especially the developers in the room. I know that you like the graphs to go, if they're supposed to go up, you want them to go up. If they're supposed to get lower. We saw overall our results were something like 10% more people were finding the knowledge base as a whole helpful, which means that 10% more people were coming to the website, getting a solution. Looks something like this. The red box is where we released the new IA. It goes up. It goes the right way. And this was great. This translates into 7.25 million people a year are finding their solution when last year they didn't. I swear when I did this at home, it lasted longer. But I'm perfectly happy to, this is me if you want to get a hold of me. I'm perfectly happy to go back and sort of dig into any of the things that we did here. There were lots of log analyses. There were lots of term frequency analyses. I wanted to cover the big ones that you can sort of do by yourself. But any questions? Yes. Oh, do you wanna?
Hello.
Hi.
I'm curious how you chose your sample set of users to run against TreeJack, and if you did choose them, how you chose them, and what the sample size was.
Sure. The sample size was probably not as high as you would want it to be for statistical significance. We did a sort of a random sampling of users. I think we did it on exit, but I'm not remembering that perfectly. And we ended up with something like, for each step in the test, we ended up with something like 50 respondents. If you're a math nerd like I am, you know that you really want like 250, but this was enough data for us to be fairly confident that we were at least moving in the right direction. For the card sorts, we had something like 50 people respond to that. And we took a sample of the articles. We took something like 200 articles, and then we cut that up randomly into thirds, and then we asked people to sort 1/3 of it instead of the entire thing because it was kind of a lot. But yeah, so random sampling worked out pretty well.
Any other questions?
I was just curious, the people that were working on the redesign, were they also handling support tickets, or was their sole job doing the redesign?
We don't have support tickets, not exactly. And don't quote me on that in 3 months, but Mozilla is very community driven. We have a team of people who work on support, but they're way too small to deal with the 450 million users that we have, right? So what we have is the knowledge base, which is what we were focusing on here. And we have what we call the Ask a Question flow, which is a question and answer section of the website. And there, people who haven't found their answer in the docs get to ask something, and community, sometimes employees, sometimes Firefox engineers, jumps in and answers it for them. So most of the people who are working on something like a redesign probably jump in once in a while and answer questions, but it's not so much a support ticket thing. And the people who were working on the redesign were not necessarily our support team so much as our user experience folks and a contractor, and then visual design people. So different set of.
I wanted to add one point. I thought that might be interesting. So about that ask a question flow. So before this, we would get about 3,000 questions a week, and one of those symptoms was lots of questions that we have articles for, and answering them was just like, oh, here, you should read the article. It tells you how to do this. After doing this, we cut those questions down to about 500 a week, and most of those questions are like the super hard, like developers who are lost asking questions about how come my JavaScript is broken. I'm like, oh, I don't hate this. So that's another problem to solve. But yeah.
That's a good point. Thank you. I didn't really cover that because it was kind of a parallel process, but we also added a completion taskbar or a completion bar to the ask a question flow, and people started finishing it more often because they could tell they weren't so deep in the woods.
All right, anybody up top, you just want to shout something out?
I have a question. You mentioned something about you found that you need to consolidate some of the pages and maybe rename them. Did that result in any issues? Those pages that used to be there no longer being there, that were maybe referenced or that people had even bookmarked? And if so, how did you handle that when pages that people used to go to are no longer there?
So in case anybody didn't hear, the question is, when we consolidate and rename articles, are we deleting pages, and what happens to external links? Or this is actually handled in software. Not when you delete a page, because we wouldn't know where to go, but if you rename a page, we leave a redirect in place so that any old links will end up in the same spot. And one of the big things that we did was we went through and sort of stylistically simplified what all of our URL slugs looked like. And that was a sort of big thing that changed every article's URL, but we had all these redirects in place. So that was, we did care about that. We try to get people to update those links so that they're not bouncing through, redirects on their way, but let's see.
Is there another question? Or, yeah.
For like marketing materials, Mozilla has a lot of brands now that's online. You guys have this now out in any web docs, like you're talking about areas of now, people like want answered or questions asked. You guys decide on the way of name stuff.
Yes. So we have. This isn't the right picture. It's somewhere in the slide deck. If you go to support.mozilla.org, you'll see the visual result of following the Mozilla style guide. There is a style guide for writing articles. If you want to talk more to the people responsible for it, Michael's down here in front. He's wearing a gray shirt. And that helped a lot, like just deciding, being consistent.
Anyone else? All right, cool. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you.